Your skin is the largest organ and accounts for 15% of your body weight. And your skin consists of 3 layers. By the way, have we any science teachers in the house this morning? None. Good, I can just make stuff up then. So let's talk about the 3 layers of your skin. The topmost outer layer is called your epidermis. And your epidermis is responsible for making new skin cells, and it's responsible for giving your skin its color. And the epidermis has special cells that are part of your immune system, and they all work together to keep you healthy. Now, just below the epidermis, you have the dermis, and your dermis is fascinating because it consists of this tough connective tissue, and it has things like hair follicles and sweat glands, and your dermis has nerve endings, and these nerve endings help you feel things. Welcome to Science 101. Just below the dermis is the hypodermis, also known as, this is a really fun word to say, the subcutaneous fat. And the subcutaneous fat is really important because it helps regulate your body temperature, and this fat, see, it pads your muscles and your bones, and it protects you when you fall. And the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And your body. Let's talk about your body for just a moment, because your body is also fascinating. You are made up of about 75 trillion cells, and each cell contains hundreds of thousands of molecules with 6 feet of DNA in each cell. And the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And see, you lose 50 to 150 strands of hair every single day, which means in the Canaday household where I live with 3 girls, all of whom have long hair, there is lots of loose strands of hair around. Not only are you losing your hair, each and every day you lose approximately 10 billion flakes of skin is shedding from your body. By the way, 90% of our household dust comes from your shed skin. So you know what that means. Y'all need to go home and vacuum and then do it again. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. And see, you have things like elbows and a pancreas and femurs. And go ahead for just a moment, touch your elbows. Come on, put your elbows up, touch them. They're kind of awkward and weird, aren't they? Look at your neighbor's elbows. We all got them. They're weird. You can do it. Now, your elbows, it's funny because when you hit your elbow in a certain way, you can get a tingling, really uncomfortable sensation that goes throughout your body. Have you had that happen? Yeah, so have I. Because you have what we call in our vernacular a funny bone, and when you hit it, it's really uncomfortable. And you have a pancreas. I read about a pancreas, and I still can't explain to you what a pancreas does. But I know I misspelled it on my iPad, and when I did, it came up with the red line under it. So I clicked on it to spell it correctly, and it gave me the origins of the word. You know where pancreas comes from? It comes from the Greek. Pan, P-A-N, all, creas, flesh. Your pancreas is all flesh, and you have femurs. Big, largest, strongest bones in your body running up in your thighs. And see, if you ever break your femur, you will experience a tremendous amount of pain. Yeah, there's a story there. I was 21 years old, and I was dating this beautiful girl named Tammy, who is now my wife, and she was coming back home with me to a place called Lake of the Ozarks, and it was early summer. And it was her first time to see me do my thing. See, I grew up wakeboarding. It's how I spent my springs and summers daily. I wakeboarded. And if you don't know what wakeboarding is, think of snowboarding except on the water being pulled behind a boat. I had someone to impress. Nah, I don't need to stretch. Nah, I don't need a warm-up run. Just let me do my thing. I was the first one on the board. I was the first one in the water. I cut out my very first run, cut out to the wake. I cut back in. And I'm doing a tantrum to blind. You know what that is? Tantrum to blind is where you do a backflip, and in the air you do a 180. And so you land blind, the rope's behind your back, and you're faced the opposite way of the boat. And if you land it, it's really cool. And I landed it, all right? I landed it. But see, the problem is when I landed, I heard a big pop. And I went down in the water. And I came back up. And I was screaming. I mean, it was the most physical pain I have ever endured. And that loud pop was my femur snapping in half. Yeah, it's kind of gross to talk about, isn't it? And the doctor told me that I was really lucky because that femur bone was just centimeters from piercing through my flesh and skin. And if that happened, it was a whole host of other problems, being in a dirty lake. And see, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And see, we're both skin and blood and being. And when we're healthy, we operate at a constant 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And you have 100 watts of energy surging through your body. That is near the equivalence of the 2 light bulbs that hang above your mirror in the bathroom. And yet, we can still say things. We have the capacity to say things like, I feel so empty. And the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And 2 Sundays ago on New Year's Eve Sunday, right here in our own neighborhood, at a nearby apartment complex, a man opened fire, wounded several officers, wounded a civilian, and one of those bullets killed Deputy Zach Parrish. And see, on that same day, babies were born. Anniversaries were celebrated. People were climbing and summiting Mount Kilimanjaro. And it all raises the question, like, what are we made of? What in the heck are we made of? And the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And see, our skin, man, it is the most vulnerable part of our body. And it is oftentimes the reason for judgment and discrimination and racism and hate and mistreatment and just plain cruelty. And the Word became flesh and made his home among us. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? God came into the world with skin. Now, if you've ever been to one of our Christmas Eve services, you know that every Christmas Eve service here at St. Luke's, it ends the same way, and it has for years. Reverend Sally carries the lit Christ candle. It's dark in here, and she carries the lit Christ candle through this center aisle out of the sanctuary. And as she does, she's reciting the opening words to John's Gospel, the first 5 verses that begin like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I mean, the very essence of God. Like who God was, the very spirit, the very breath of God. And how does it end? Verse 5. Verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And then if we were to continue reading, we would get to verse 14 that tells us what the Word does. What is this Word doing? This Word is born into the world, became flesh, and made his home, pitched his tent, made his dwelling among us. And then if we were to keep reading, John chapter 1, how does the chapter end? We're told what the Word is doing in the world. What is Jesus doing in the world? And see, Jesus is always found with the people. Jesus was always building relationships. He was always saying to people, come follow me. Yeah, come follow me. Philip, come follow me. Philip was one of Jesus' disciples, started following Jesus. Philip then goes and tells Nathanael, chapter 1, verse 45. Nathanael, man, you're not going to believe it. Dude, we have found the one that Moses was talking about. We found the one that he was writing about in the law and the prophets. And Nathanael says, well, who is he? I mean, what's his name? Where's he from? And Philip says, his name is Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth. Very next verse, verse 46. How does Nathanael respond? Nazareth. I mean, come on, Phil. Nazareth? Does anything good come out of Nazareth? Does anything good come out of that dump hole? Nazareth? How does Philip respond? Come and see. I mean, John's gospel is always about this beautiful invitation, come and see. And you see, when we're reading and hearing and reciting together those beautiful words, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have to realize that us, it isn't just us. It isn't just good going church folk. It isn't just us in Highlands Ranch. It's a very collective us. It's a global us. And so what that means is when it comes to South Denver Highlands Ranch, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And when it comes to Haiti, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. And when it comes to Africa, all the countries in Africa, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. You see, because us is them and them is us, because they too have elbows and a pancreas and femurs, and they too are made up of 75 trillion cells and 100 watts of energy surging through their body. And see, many of you know that I and many others in this congregation have had the incredible honor and privilege of spending time in Africa, particularly in the country of Kenya, and last year, Zambia. And we've been part of this project for the last several years. And this family that you see on the screen, they're near and dear to my heart, these 4 kids. Their mom's name is Molenta, and she's a strong and courageous woman, small business owner. And I think she doesn't just have 100 watts of energy, she has 1,000 watts of energy surging through her, because I've sat next to her in worship services. And man, she can sing. That lady can sing. And see, she's raising these babies. And 2 years ago, I get an email from Molenta. And she says, "Hey, Pastor Ryan, I just had a baby boy. And I named him after you." I mean, talk about an honor, right? That little dude with the pink hat, his name is Ryan. And she says in her email, she says, "I hope next time you're here, you get to meet him." And not only did I get to meet him last May, but see, in that church, they don't do infant baptisms, baby baptisms. They do baby dedications. And so I got to hold little Ryan and give a blessing to him with oil on his flesh. And then I got to pray this prayer of dedication to dedicate him to God. And it was one of the most powerful moments I've ever been a part of. And see, the problem becomes, anytime we see them and we see anything less than children of God, I mean, anytime we see their faces and we see anything other than the face of Christ, then, my friends, we abandon the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I don't often do this. And by not often, I mean never have I done this. But I have friends in Zambia and Kenya that I know tune in to some of our sermons. They tune into the St. Luke's YouTube channel because I get notes from them. And so, Ken, which camera am I on right now? This one. I just want to speak a word of blessing to my brothers and sisters in Africa. You are loved. You are worthy. You are not a throwaway. You are not forgotten. God is with you. You are created in the image of God. We are with you. And you are not alone. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. All of us. See, skin is important. Skin matters. Because to have skin and flesh is what it means to be human. And that's why it's the most important theological and practical essence of our faith, the Christian faith. And here's why: because God intentionally put on skin for us, for you and for me, for them. Jesus came and roamed our streets, walked our neighborhood. Now the fancy theological term for this is incarnation. And incarnation is a word that means to take on flesh. And this is why I think it's so important. Because in my experience and observation, people are not looking for doctrine and dogma. And this is coming from a guy who found purpose in doctrine and dogma. This is coming from a guy who would love to argue with you and battle with you about these debates. Oh, and when I was an 18-year-old knucklehead off to Bible school, I would love to argue with you about when Jesus was coming back. And was it going to be pre-trib or post-trib, or maybe it would be during the tribulation. And if you're thinking to yourself right now, what in the heck is he talking about? Good, because it is a completely meaningless debate and it stays way up here. Oh, and I would love to argue with you about creation. And that was when I read the scriptures in a very literal sense, and it kept me way up here, distant from God. And did creation, did it happen really in 6 days? And was this thing just 7,000 years ago? And if you're thinking, oh my goodness, he believed that? Yeah. Another meaningless debate that stays way up here. Oh, and then we can graduate to more important debates like transubstantiation. And when we partake in the elements, do the elements actually become something else, or do they remain symbolic? And don't get me wrong, I love theology. I love theological ideas and concepts. But you see, these ideas and concepts, they only hold significance if they are speaking to real people in a real world. You see, our theology, as well as our church experience, it falls short. It completely falls short if it leads us to a God who is just up there somewhere, completely disconnected from real people in a real world who experience real joy and real suffering. Again, in my experience, people are not looking for doctrine. No one has ever said to me, man, if I could just get that creation stuff figured out, then I'd be part of that Jesus movement. Or if I could just figure out this exact theology on this exact issue, then I'd become a part of the church. Man, it's not what they're looking for. They're looking for a God that they can relate to, a God they can connect with, a God they can be honest with, a God they can struggle with, a God they can ask questions with, a God they can connect their lives to. See, if our theology doesn't lead us to a God of connection, then we miss the incarnation. If our theology only leads to church people sitting in sanctuaries and classrooms and thinking about theology, then we miss the incarnation. If our theology doesn't lead us to see our interconnectedness, that they too have elbows and a pancreas and femurs, and they too are made up of 75 trillion cells, and they too have 100 watts of energy flowing through their body. If it doesn't lead us to see that, then we miss the God of incarnation. Anyone know the name Eugene Peterson? He translated the version of the Bible called The Message. I love what he does with 14. It's not just the Word became flesh and made his home among us, but the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. You see, if our theology doesn't lead us to a deeper love for one another and a deeper love for our neighbor, then we miss the God who moved into the neighborhood. One of my favorite theologians, Richard Rohr, he says this: we will never agree on the meanings of words. That's why the Word became flesh, to reveal that words can't get you there. Only experience, love, and relationship can. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I mean, is there any greater love than this? God becoming one of us. God being with us. I mean, think about the times in your life when people were truly with you, not to solve a problem or just to come along and give you quick fixes and answers, but when people truly stood with you. Or when you truly stood with people, not to fix them, but to be with them. There's nothing more powerful, is there? And yet that's what we're called to be in the world. To be with people. To be Jesus with skin. And so I want to invite you to reflect on these two questions throughout the rest of this The Word Became Flesh series. And that is, what aspect of God, what aspect of love am I being called to incarnate in the world today? In other words, what aspect of love are you being called to take on in the flesh today? And today, how can you be Jesus? And so as the band comes and plays this song, I want to invite you, if you'd like to move. We have a station here. One simple way you can be Jesus right here, right now, today is to write an encouraging note, a short encouraging note, and put it in this lunch sack. And tomorrow, when the 100 lunches are made for our homeless friends in Civic Center Park, they'll open up that lunch and a note will be in there from you that will remind them that they are not forgotten, that they too are one of us, and we are them. Or if you're being called to incarnate something in the world, and you've been thinking about this for quite some time, and you want a blessing for the journey, if you need a simple blessing for the journey, to remind you that the Word became flesh so that you could be flesh in the world, I invite you to come forward. Reverend Jessica and I will be offering a simple blessing of oil on your hand, on your flesh. So if you'd like to move at this time, I invite you to do so.